Welcome, everybody. My name is Jo Gregory. I'm one of the directors with Ten2Two. I'm sure that I've had the pleasure of speaking to some of you, and those that I haven't, hi. Welcome to our webinar on interviewing to secure the right candidate. I'm not going to tread on Tracy's toes and tell you all about today, but I am just going to do a quick intro, let you know who we are and go through a little bit of housekeeping. So for those of you who don't know, Ten2Two are specialists in part-time and flexible recruitment and consulting. We've been around for about 18 years now, which is a very, very long time. And are delighted to work with like-minded businesses across the country in securing exceptional talent by utilising flexible working practices. We like to support our clients in a number of ways, and these webinars are run just to give you additional value, and hopefully you can take some useful tips away from today. Just a little bit of housekeeping to let you know this is being recorded, so we will be able to share a recording, so you don't have to write copious notes unless you really want to. And also mine and Tracy's contact details will be at the end and will be emailed out to you tomorrow. So if you've got any follow-up questions, please do let us know. If you've got questions during the presentation, there is a Q&A box. The Q&A box is completely confidential, so only myself and Tracy can see that. We do that instead of having a general chat box, just means we can get through the content nice and quickly because we are on a little bit of a time limit and we don't want to take up your entire lunch break. So please do use the Q&A box. Don't worry, nobody else will see. And also, of course, your videos and microphones are not on, so you can use now to have a quick sandwich and nobody will know. So without further ado, I will hand you over to my colleague Tracy, who's going to be taking you through the content today.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And as Jo said, we try to help clients where we can with the process, because obviously a smoother process means hopefully more successful placements. And, you know, recruitment is one of the biggest investments a business can make. There's the time and cost of the recruitment itself, the salary, the investment in training. So getting every part of it is key to a successful hire. And today we're just going to look at the interviewing stage. Now, there are obviously loads of stages before and after, and we do cover those in other webinars, but just today in half an hour, it's a bit of a pacey run through on interviews. So let's have a quick look at the agenda here. So I'm not going to run through this in much detail, but we'll quickly cover purpose of interviewing, the process, what you need to prepare, some etiquette, quite a bit on structure and questions and how to measure. That's really important. Some things to avoid, and then just to follow up and time for questions at the end. So we'll try and cover this off in half an hour with leaving, we hope, about 10 minutes for Q&As at the end. Now, interviews are still the predominant way that companies recruit. There are supplementary ways of doing this now as well. So it's usually on top of an interview, but there are tests, presentations, psychometrics, but nothing really can replace meeting a potential employee in an interview. So let's go on to the purpose of the interview. So first of all, from your side as an employer, you're looking to establish what skills the candidate can bring to the role. And this can be hard and soft skills, and it should be both. I mean, importantly, you're trying to establish if the person has the ability to do the job that you're recruiting for. You are also looking for a good cultural fit with both the company and the team that person's going to be working within. And finally, you will want to establish whether the terms of the position are a match for this candidate. So there's nothing more frustrating than thinking you've found your ideal match, you know, only to get to the end of the process and find out that they want £5,000 more or £10,000 more. But if you're working with a recruitment agency, in an ideal world, they will have already had those conversations, but it is still a good time to double check things. It could be location, the working hours, or other expectations as well. And of course, interviews are also for the candidate. Now, this is something that I think, you know, it's a preconception. It's sort of ingrained in us that this is all about the employer undertaking the interview, we have to reframe this. So it's a match. So both sides have to match. So from a candidate's point of view, it needs to be a two-way conversation. You know, you want to make them want the job. So it's your opportunity to promote elements of the role, the company, how interesting it is, the values of your company. You know, you want them to have a really positive experience with you. And even if they aren't the right person or they aren't successful, you want them to walk away from the process, they're a customer touch point effectively. You want them to walk away from this process with a really positive view of how they were treated and handled and what a great company it would have been if they'd been successful. So just contributes towards your employer brand. So we just need to think that it's not an ordeal, it's not a test for them, it's a conversation. So let's look at the interview process. Now, it will vary by company and role. So larger companies will probably have different processes to small and medium-sized businesses. There's no right or wrong answer within reason. And if you have a process at the moment and it works, and you think it works, and it does work, stick with it. If not, here's some things to consider. So I think time commitment is probably one of the things that's at the top of our list from as a recruiter's point of view. So interviewing takes time and it deserves that time dedicated to it to get it right. Now, at the start of that process, when you initiate a job going out to the market, you need to be booking time in to the relevant people's diaries in the company who are going to be involved in that hiring process. It could be 1 or 2 managers, it could be HR, but you need to try and map that out and free up some time in the coming week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to make sure you've got time set aside. You know, we see this a lot where we submit CVs to employers and then we have to wait maybe a couple of weeks before a time slot is available where the right hiring managers are available. And at the moment, in the market as it is, you know, we can lose candidates in that time frame if we don't move quickly enough. And I think this might be a message that we say a lot throughout this call about speed of the market at the moment. So definitely consider your time commitment and book that in. The level of the role might dictate a different process. So if you've got really senior hire, it could be incredibly important to the business. You may want additional stages in the process. You may want input from a wider set of stakeholders. It could even be a lunch with the founder or presentation to the board. If it's a more junior position, entry level, then maybe, oops, sorry, I'm moving on. It could be a 1 or 2 stage interview. Pre-screening. So the most, as an agency, we pre-screen a candidate and we'll send them to you with quite a detailed summary. If you're receiving CVs from yourselves directly and you're not using an agency, you may want to do an initial telephone or video screen before inviting them to a formal interview. Deciding who's going to be involved in the process. Again, this comes into sort of the time commitment piece at the start. Decide who are going to be the key decision makers in this process and make sure you include them at the right stages. There's pros and cons to this. I'm going to say it's better to have fewer stages and more people than more stages with one person at every stage. That said, for a, say, junior administration role, you don't really want to have an interview where you've got 4 people in a panel interviewing them. It's a bit overkill. So, but I think it's better to keep those stages to a minimum and the time commitment. I mean, we have come across stages before where there's been 8 stages for a role, you know, and I think even with the most senior, that's probably at the top end of what we'd expect. In terms of format, the most common format we see at the moment is an initial video call. Some people are doing telephone call with 1 or 2 staff members, followed by a second face-to-face, often with different people, or it might be with one consistent person adding in someone else. We often see presentations or other kinds of tests being involved at second interview for that sort of middle management role or a highly technical role. That could be a presentation, often in marketing and HR terms, we see that. Psychometric tests are included sometimes, maybe a technical test, and by that I mean it could be an Excel test or a verbal reasoning test. So I hope that gives you the core considerations of the process. So let's go on to preparation. So start with your job description. Consider what's in your job description. What is that role needing for the company? Compare what you absolutely need to what the expected education, skill, experience you want to see on that candidate's CV or in that candidate. Organize those requirements into a list, and then you will use those to create intentional interview questions. You can add in more value-based and open-ended questions around cultural fit. You can add in softer questions, but we'll come back to this in a few slides. The core is around these competency and skills-based questions. Read your candidate's CV. So spend time reading it from start to end before the interview. You know, I think you've got that person in front of you for an hour. Make the most of that hour, maximize that hour. You don't really want to be spending time going through the CV at that point. So if you've read it before, make a note of anything that stands out and anything that is in that CV that is highly relevant for the role. If you're working with an agency, you may well have a profile. We provide quite detailed profiles alongside the CVs, and it adds a little bit of colour, personality. It might flag certain things for discussion. So read that as well, because that might help you pinpoint some of the conversation pieces. And make notes on that you want to dig deeper into. And it could be key achievements. It could be elements on the role that really stand out to you that you want to dig deeper into. If you're working without an agency, you might want to just look at inconsistencies, maybe any gaps, any shorter roles, shorter assignments to discuss. And don't be put off by shorter assignments and gaps. You know, there are often life stories that go alongside the CVs that explain that. And it can be a combination of redundancy, relocation, time off for children, pandemic. So, you know, look at those and have an open conversation to try and understand that process and that journey. So let's go on to some of the etiquette. These are probably things you'll be aware of, hopefully. If not, let's just have a look at them. So beforehand, make sure the candidate's aware of what's expected of them at the interview, who's attending, who's going to be interviewing, where they need to go. Again, if you're working with an agency, the interviews would normally be arranged by them, by us, for example. And we would have covered this kind of information. So just to give you an example, what we provide candidates is obviously the time and date. We'll provide them names of who's interviewing them so that they can go off and do their own research before attending. Access issues, so where to park, how to find the door to get in the building, who's going to meet them, that sort of thing. So again, I might say this a few times, and I'm sorry if I do repeat it, but this isn't meant to be an ordeal for a person. You know, we're trying to make this an enjoyable event, if you can call interviews an enjoyable event for the candidate. If you've got any extra literature or information that you want to share in advance, then that's great. Let's get that out to them as well. When planning your interviews, allow enough time, typically an hour with about 15 minutes in between. Consider any adaptations that might be needed, so any wheelchair access, for example. And if you're interviewing on video, obviously test the tech, I'll say that quickly, check the surroundings, check there's no distractions. And of course, that can also apply to in-person meetings as well, in that, you know, you don't want to be in a busy office in a corner. You want to be somewhere where the candidate feels comfortable to speak. On the day, whoever's the first point of contact, you obviously greet and reassure the candidates in a friendly way. You try to avoid having candidates meeting each other in receptions if you've got a sort of a flow of candidates coming and going on that day. I think it goes without saying to be on time. Now, this is a temptation when you've got a really great candidate and you're just chatting away. it absolutely feels nice to just carry on that conversation. But I guess just be mindful and respectful if there are other people waiting. Once the candidate's with you, take care to set the tone and the agenda and make them feel as relaxed as possible. And just be careful not to ask questions around protected characteristics with the aim of relaxing them. So it's so easy to say something like, do you have kids? I'm a mum, I might well say that. So you just have to be mindful about some of the conversations you're having. We'd always recommend making notes. This is a skill that you would pick up probably over time, but you do try to maintain eye contact with the candidate at the same time. So making notes and eye contact, it doesn't go well in the same breath, but there is a balance. So try to maintain that personal eye contact with them. And then finally, check the ID. So again, an agency should be checking the ID before they get to you. However, as an employer, you would still have the need to check and validate someone's ID to make sure they have the right to work in the UK. So just some core points there. Let's go on to a typical interview structure. So this is based on an hour-long interview. It would be great to start off by spending 10 minutes or so describing your company, the purpose, maybe some recent successes, why it's a great place to work there. You are selling the role and the company to the candidate as much as they need to sell themselves to you. Talk about the role in more detail. Although this may have been explained by the agency to them, it's always good to get it from the horse's mouth. And as I said, it's a great opportunity to sell the role to the candidate and get them engaged in the process. So take a couple of minutes to explain what the process of the interview is going to be. You might simply say, we're going to ask some questions for half an hour and then over to you to ask questions, or you may then explain what the task is if there's going to be a task. This should have been communicated in that pre-information I talked about. The format should have been well explained so there's no surprises. I think these are nerve-wracking experiences for a lot of people. I think interviews are up there as one of the most, one of the things that candidates and people in general are most nervous about. And it's try not to spring surprises on people because you absolutely want to get the best out of them. And then spend about 35 minutes asking your prepared interview questions. We'll come on to some examples and of this shortly, but these could range from, career goals, your work history, the competency questions. Actively listen to the answers and probe and dig a bit deeper if you want to and follow up. It's really highly advisable to measure candidate performance on a scoring sheet and take notes. But as mentioned, try not to fixate on the note taking and not giving them attention. But the measurement is really important. And I've got a slide in a couple of slides that gives you an example of a score sheet. And then open the floor to the candidate for them to ask questions. And finally, describe the next steps to them. So they leave that interview understanding if there's another stage, when they might expect feedback, when they're looking for someone to start. So that's a sort of typical hour-long interview structure. So let's look at some types of what is it? So let's talk about what is a competency interview. What is a competency question? Because this is bandied around quite a lot. So a structured interview or competency interview effectively is designed to test one or more skills or competencies of that candidate. So it's different to unstructured or informal ones, though informal or unstructured ones could be open-ended, such as, what can you do for the company? Or, why did you apply for the job? That's just an overall open-ended question. These questions target a specific skill or a competency related to the job. And you'll probably have a list of set questions, and I would advise you do have a list of set questions that you're going to ask all candidates, and you will compare those answers against a predetermined criteria on the score sheet. And these questions work on the principle that past behaviour is the best indicator of future performance. So let's have a look at a few examples. So work history. This is around establishing basic facts against the CV. So you could ask, can you briefly talk me through your CV? And you have to be mindful to keep this on track and not let it take over the whole interview and go on for an hour. Competency questions are based on the skills needed to perform this job. So that might be teamwork is really important, or customer focus. So a couple of those could be, tell me about a time when you supported a colleague who was struggling with an area of work. So that's your teamwork. Or explain to me how you ensure that you deliver the best customer service. So a couple of examples there. And I think they typically, for me, in my mind, I always think of them as the tell me a time when type of questions, if that helps. And then there's the behavioral questioning. So this shows candidate thinking, and it could be, for example, you could be dealing with failure. So that could be, give me an example of a time when you didn't meet a goal and how you handled this. Or resilience, and leadership, possibly. So tell me about a time when you had to persuade someone resistant to your direction how to perform a task at work. And finally, you could ask a values-based question if you have a set of values that you follow within the business. So a common one is integrity. So this could be, describe a situation where you have demonstrated integrity. But if you want to see what values are important to a person first, you could say, tell us about a time when you've worked for an organization that has matched your values. And that's a little bit more open-ended. So I hope that gives you an example of the type of questions. I think typically the competency ones tend to form a large chunk of the interview process. So remember to probe and listen. So let's have a look at measuring. We'll come on to the grid next. It's really important to measure candidates' performance. And this is for both your decision making and to be able to give constructive feedback and fair feedback. Having a scorecard makes the whole process more objective and unbiased. It isn't essential, but it does add structure, and it will probably keep you on track as well. It does take a bit of skill to keep the conversation going, asking the questions, writing the answers, writing your scores. It does take a little bit of practice. And sometimes it helps if there's two of you in the interview where one talks and asks and the other one can keep track. So that's and you might flip it, for different questions. So that's quite a nice way of doing it. And then one person is always giving the candidate their attention. Make sure you define your scorecard in advance so that anybody who's involved in that interview process is working to absolutely the same brief and the same process. And you can add additional categories and questions outside of it, but the core should be, this is really around your competencies and skills. So you could ask more questions that lead to culture fit, humor, positivity, but those actually might be some of the things on that list. So let's have a look at the scorecard. I feel like I've been bigging up this scorecard and we're finally there. This is a really simple version, and you might have more complicated ones. I wouldn't say you have too much more complicated than this, but this is effectively the basic requirements. It's 6 questions that you would have the questions on there, and you are scoring each candidate against those questions. What's important is that you use one single universal set of questions for all of your candidates. This uses a 6 with a scoring system of 1 to 5. And rather than relying on intuition for that 1 to 5, you need to have a definition for what is a 1, what's a 3, and what's a 5. In this example, for example, a 1 is the candidate missed the point of the question entirely or was otherwise wholly inadequate. And an excellent candidate, number 5, it was an excellent answer. That's exactly what you're looking for. So just to give you a hint, you've probably all heard of the STAR technique before. So this is obviously an acronym for situation, task, action, and result. And your top candidates, your good candidates will probably answer along those lines. It doesn't have to be absolutely prescribed like that, but they're effectively describing a situation and sort of what the outcome was and what they did. So that's a good candidate to look out for. It's a common method. It's a really good method. And I'd always advise candidates to be thinking about that as well when they go to interviews. So just a tip on what to avoid during interviews. So these are the protected characteristics. I'm sure you've come across these before. So employees, workers, candidates, and interviewees are all protected under the Equality Act 2010. So the 9 protected characteristics are these. I'm not going to read them out necessarily. And I think you highly recommend you avoid asking questions that touch on these areas, unless it's an absolute requirement of the role and that's been approved. So for example, you need a female carer for examining female patients, for example. I mean, if you're unsure about any of these, we're not an employment lawyer or a HR consultant, but I would seek your HR lead or HR consultant advice if you're ever worried about anything like that in your interview. So we're nearly there. So you've completed your interviews, followed a fabulous process. So what do you do next? This is, you've done the chunk of it, the hard part. Make sure that you follow up in a really good way to keep on top of that momentum. So if you need to compare notes after the interview with hiring managers or stakeholders, build this in at that early planning stage in your diary. Again, we've had delays to feedback for candidates because it's been hard to pin down the stakeholders internally to get that feedback. If there are any delays, keep the candidates informed. There's absolutely perfectly fine to say to them, we're really sorry, they enjoyed meeting you. They've just got to speak to so-and-so, but that's better than no news at all. If you found your ideal candidate, don't hesitate to make an offer. So research used to show that 48 hours would be the maximum time that you should let lapse between an interview and making an offer. I would say at the moment that you should probably do it on the same day or within 24 hours. The speed of the market is highly unusual at the moment. We are having people pulling out a couple of days after applying for the role. The speed is phenomenal. So I think, if they've had an interview in the morning, you should try to offer that afternoon by the end of that day, if not the next day. For those that are unsuccessful, still, speed is of the essence. Give feedback as soon as you can, because they may well be in other processes and they may want to be giving other people updates as well. But equally, this is your employer brand. It's their perception of you as an employer and as a company, and you want them to think highly of you. So quick recap, prepare well in advance, do your research before meeting someone, listen, focus on those skills, allow for nerves and personality types in the interview. As I said, most people probably don't like interviews, they will feel nervous. And this isn't you want the best of somebody, you want to see their proper character. Ask everybody consistent and comparable questions, measure and monitor your responses, so measure your responses and follow up quickly. So I don't know how we're doing for time, Jo. How was that? Have we got time for questions?
We are absolutely bang on. We've got 10 minutes left for questions. Good. So if anyone, we've had some chat in the Q&A, but if anyone's got any further questions, please do tap away on your keyboard now and get those across. If you'd rather come back to us separately, then you will have our contact details, and we're always happy to talk to people and coach you guys through things. Thank you so much for that, Tracy. That was a lot of information in a short period of time. I do hope that everybody was able to glean something. There's so much to take into consideration, and Tracy and I probably get bored of the sound of our own voice when we say to people just how fast the market is at the moment, and just how key it is to do that pre-planning bit and to make sure that everybody's diaries are matching up as much as possible. And interestingly, it sounds like that's something that's on the tip of people's tongues, because some of the questions that we've had through are about timing of process. So we talked just now, Tracy, about timing recommended between interview and offer, I've had a question come through saying we work mostly remote and struggle to get the right people in the office to do the interviews. I'm assuming this is current colleagues into the office to do the interviews. How long is reasonable between seeing CVs and actually getting somebody in for an interview?
I think if there's no preparation required, so you don't need them to do a big, this is probably going to be a first interview, so it's probably going to be more of that informal, not informal, but that standard interview. I would say you're better off, if you can't get people in, you're better off doing a video or a telephone call, if you are remote, and then arranging that face-to-face, arranging that at that point for the following week, assuming that that person will go through. I think in terms of timings, if you get a good CV and you don't need that much preparation, I would say a couple of days, 2, 3, 4 days, get that candidate in quickly.
Absolutely.
I mean, some candidates might want more time because they might want they might be working full time, they might also have a family, they might have stuff on. So they do need time to do their own due diligence into you and do their research. But I think 2, 3, 4 days for that first contact.
Absolutely. I think also the key is to establish a line of communication. So even if you do struggle with your diaries and getting an absolute date in, let the candidate know that they are of interest, whether that's through the agency or whether it's directly. As long as you can let them know that they have been reviewed, you're interested, you would like to get them in, because otherwise they're going to be off in other processes and might not know that they're of interest to you. So
absolutely.
I mean, my pushback as well, if you guys work mainly remotely, do you need to see the person?
Absolutely.
We've got a lot of clients now who do their entire interview process remote. I know that there is some concern around the softer side of the interviews. And again, we can support and guide and kind of coach around this, but we've got some clients who've initially built in a few minutes at the beginning and a few minutes at the end of an online interview to replicate that walk from the lift to the office, that time when you're just kind of chatting. And again, you do have to be careful about protected characteristics within that time because it is softer, it is more informal. But it's also a very, very valuable time to help reassure the candidate, to make sure there's nerves, to sort of softly introduce yourself in a less formal environment. So online interviews are different, but they can be used just as effectively as face-to-face interviews if handled properly.
And I think, Jo, that first 5 or 10 minutes where the employer is explaining about their company, some successes, things they've been doing, that's an opportunity for the interviewee to relax a bit because they're listening. They're not suddenly put on the spot. So it's not quite the walk. The idea that Jo's got is great, that walk through. But equally, if that is equally as difficult, you talking to them gives them time to just settle in and sort of listen. So
absolutely. And as Tracy rightly said, this is a two-way process. So you need to sell to almost as much, if not more times than they need to sell to you. I think we did touch on this a little bit, just to come back to another question that we've had. We found a lot of candidates are pulling out of the process. Can we do anything to prevent this? Tracy, do you want to jump in?
There's probably a lot of things. I think time. So time, time commitment, speed, responsiveness, communication with them. So absolutely, as Jo and Jo mentioned just then, even if you can't book them in straight away, let them know you like them. And then they are more likely to stay with you and not rush off going, they may not rush off and make a decision on another job if they know that you're interested. And a bigger piece, this maybe as a webinar in the future, is your employer brand. If you have a strong and positive employer brand out there in the market, somebody is more likely to hang around and wait and be patient for it. And I had a fabulous example yesterday where a candidate went through a lengthy process and chose a company. They had 2 offers and they chose the company that wasn't the biggest package, but it was the better cultural fit, their values, the way they'd been treated through the process. They chose the job for that over a package. And it really demonstrated to me how important that is in the market at the moment.
Absolutely. I don't think that can be laboured on enough, really, how candidates are looking more holistically at businesses rather than just, I mean, obviously, we all work to earn a living. It's got to particular criteria in terms of individual needs, but that wider set of values, that employer brand, I mean, we get into all kinds of different conversations around and specifics there. Decisions can be taken on all different reasons. So making sure that your employer brand is really, really strong, and all of the people involved in the process are reflecting that employer brand as well. Making sure it stands the message that you want to be getting across.
Yeah.
Right, we are running out of time, and I've got one more really, really interesting question, and it's very topical at the moment for those of you who are obsessed with recruitment, which I'm not expecting of our guests to be. So a member has asked, I know a company that sends interview questions to candidates in advance. What are your thoughts on this? I see.
I like it. I'm a softie. I like people to be prepared. I really, really believe this, interviews are scary processes for most people. And it's almost like your scorecard, but in advance. So why not put everybody on the level playing field and say, these are the questions we're going to ask. What you don't want is them to come back with sheets of paper just reading off their answers in the interview. But if you make clear, we're giving you the questions in advance because this is what we're looking for. So dig deep, go back home in your peace and quiet in your own time, think about what skills you've got, when you've demonstrated that, and come back with those examples. Because, I've worked for many, many years. And if somebody said, when did you do that? It might be 10 years ago. But I just need maybe a bit of space and time, not when I'm sitting there being watched by everybody, to just think of a good example. And I've probably got them. And so I like them. It's not many employers do it. I like them because I just think it gives everybody an equal footing. I don't know, Jo, what do you think? You might think differently.
I agree. I think it's a fine line. It's a lot of businesses are talking about it at the moment. A lot of recruiters are talking about it at the moment. It is quite topical. It is, as you said, it's dangerous because you're opening up the opportunity for candidates to come in and have I did this and I did that, and which you obviously don't want. And part of the interview process we appreciate is to understand how people think on their feet, if that's relevant to the role. There are subtleties within an interview that still need to be satisfied.
Absolutely. I think,
to support candidates who may be slightly more nervous, to support candidates who may have the world of neurodiversity is so broad now that maybe this is a way of supporting a wide range of candidates without necessarily knowing what their approach to the interview scenario might be. I think it's something that employers should definitely be thinking about in advance, and thinking about whether it matches their values as an employer and whether it matches the brand that they want to show people.
Absolutely, because I think your point about there are some roles that will require as one of the top skills to be able to respond to problems under pressure like that, and I think absolutely. But if it's a finance assistant where your functions are core, they are repetitive, you sort of know what you've got to do, I don't know why you would be putting them under pressure if it's a fair, that kind of, yes, they might come up against sudden deadlines, but typically not that kind of role. But if it's a sales professional, perhaps, they might face objections. So they are very much that kind of style.
And all this leads back to our initial point of making sure that you're putting in the time at the beginning, and that you're really giving consideration to the needs of the role and the competencies required in the role, and making sure that your questions, your style of interview, your structure of interview all lead to your ability to make decisions based on those core requirements, rather than anything else that maybe even without meaning, could be read into your decision-making process. Because you know, everybody's going to walk away with a different take on the conversation. So that scoring card or notes are really, really key. We are now starting time. And I would like to finish off just by thanking everybody for giving us their time today. It's always great to see so many of our clients joining in on these webinars. It shows that you really do care about the process and you really do care about bringing the right people into your organisation. If any of you need anything at all, mine and Tracy's contact details are there, or just pick up the phone to any of the team using the main switchboard number in front of you as well. Anyone should be able to help you. And there's no question too big or too small. We're always here to help. So thank you again. A recording will be sent out to you over the next 24 to 48 hours, roughly. And we hope to see you at the next webinar very soon.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you.